Story 1. You may have heard stories about skinwalkers, Native American witches or spirits that turn into animals to cause harm. But at the lake where I spent the larger portion of my childhood summers, they went by a different name. Deerians. The story has faded to most families at the lake over time, but mine still recites it in hushed whispers around the campfire. The legend of the Deerians begins sometime in the 18th century. Settlers from Europe flocked to northern Michigan with hopes of getting a head start on the fur trade. That's when they found the lake, and at the lake there were native tribes. Most were welcoming and hospitable, others were quiet and kept to themselves, but most were kind. Most. There was one tribe, a single tribe that resided in the swamps on the western side of the lake, and they were vicious. They would attack anyone who strayed too far into the swamp, man, woman, child, settler, even the other tribes. Nobody knew why they were so aggressive. They tried to leave them alone, but the attacks added up, and then followed the deaths and disappearances. And the settlers had had enough. They began to set up traps and ambushes in the swamp where they knew the tribe would be. Common hunting grounds, pathways, even the village itself. But they were all always abandoned, inhabited only by a herd of white-tailed deer. Sometimes, people never came home from the swamp. They'd go missing for days on end, but later would be found completely mangled. Most blamed wolves or a bear or a mountain lion. But upon further inspection, the only tracks that would ever be found in the area belonged to deer. But that's not the story. No. My story takes place hundreds of years after the deaths and disappearances of French settlers. I had always dismissed the stories of the Deerians as just that, stories. Tales to frighten wide-eyed children and keep them within the confines of the family property. But one evening changed all of that completely. Bald eagles are a common sight at the lake, but their nests are not easy to find. Therefore, when my cousin said he'd found a nest while he was kayaking along the river that ran through the swamp, my dad and I naturally wanted to see it. We hopped into a rickety old canoe and with what little daylight we had left, set off towards the swamp. As we approached, we noticed something. It was a doe, drinking peacefully from the water. She didn't notice us at first, but something made her look up and notice Dad and me. It was at this moment I knew something was up. White-tailed deer are another dime a dozen animal at the lake. Though if you get more than about 100 feet of one, they take off. But this deer was different. They just stood there. And as we got closer, I could tell this deer was wrong. She looked as if a child had read about deer at one time in a book, and then drew from what little they understood. I got close enough to the deer so that I could almost touch her, but then she calmly turned and walked, like a marionette, into the woods. Dad and I looked at each other, but laughed it off. It was nothing. It had to be. Just some deformed deer. We entered the river, and immediately I was hit with a wall of sound. Birds, crickets, and cicadas accompanied us on our journey, and as we turned the first bend, I heard something in the tall grass to my right. Rustling. A big animal. Perhaps that malformed deer. Dad didn't seem to notice, but I listened closely. Rustling. Then, to my surprise, a low whisper. And with a hyena-like giggle, the thing ran off into the woods. I felt uneasy. I felt watched. I wanted to tell Dad, but I was worried he'd tease me. So, we just kept paddling. Eventually, we stopped to rest. We scanned the tops of the trees for the eagle nests until we noticed something. The swamp, which had previously been bustling with life, was empty. No birds, no crickets, no cicadas, no noise at all. Until I heard another low whisper from the grass to my right. Then another to my left. Then giggling all around. I no longer felt watched. I felt hunted. Something splashed in the water behind me, but by the time I turned to look, all I saw was tracks of a deer. I looked at Dad, who I had never seen afraid before, and I knew he was absolutely terrified. We began to paddle for dear life, and with that the swamp roared to life, We paddled against the current as birds dive-bombed us and insects swarmed us, and the giggling, all around. We paddled for what seemed like an eternity, until suddenly, silence. Dad and I were on the open lake, safely away from the confines of the swamp. I took the time to try and calm myself down until something plunked into the water beside me. I looked and saw an arrowhead sinking slowly into the shallow water of the bay. I hesitantly turned to seek its source, and only saw a stag walking like a marionette disappear into the swamp. Story 2. This story is told from the perspective of a female. I made this account to start fresh and anew. I made this account so what I'm about to put down in this post will be taken seriously, or at least even a smidge more seriously as compared to how it would have been taken if posted by a 3-month-old Star Wars meme account. As a disclaimer, this isn't fiction. If it were, I would have slapped this in the subreddit No Sleep, or some other horror fiction sub. Everything that is about to be unravelled in this post has happened to me, and everything that is about to be unravelled in this post are the accumulated reasons that led to my ultimate retirement as a cryptid hunter. For years, I was always intrigued by the thought that something could exist just out of sight, something teasing our simple human peripherals. I had been on many a ghost hunt, sleepless nights in some of America's most haunted hotels, afternoon picnics in abandoned limestone quarries, and endless searching for elusive secret tunnels rumoured to be snaking underneath North American cities. I was fairly seasoned by the paprika of the supernatural, but despite the rather impressive number of files I kept on what could be speculated to be undeniable spectral evidence, I remained a skeptic. I hungered for something I could see that wasn't a fleeting turquoise streamer trailing across a darkened hotel room wall. Something I could touch that wasn't a cluster of unexplained reddish streaks raking down my back in the morning. I had a hunger for something that I hadn't tasted before, and it was growing to be insatiable. My initial hunt began in 2016. I traipsed and waded through hundreds of green-on-black text forums dedicated to the potential existence of aliens, 2-page websites with sparkly click-and-drag blingies of Bigfoot himself littering the corners, and countless other corners of the web with lagging Loch Ness Monster cursors that most likely embedded amateur viruses onto my laptop. But it was a simple grayscale forum board where I first found the word Skinwalker. The name itself sparked intrigue. What a deliciously horrible name. Enough to make your flesh crawl. Or walk, in this case. Puns aside, I had a nagging feeling that this was the exact creature I was seeking. The one that could prove to be a worthy hunt. On said forum board, I found mostly bump replies in the 12 or 13 pages of the thread I found to have the most promising titles. But sprinkled within were detailed accounts of Skinwalker spottings, with attached files of grainy, mostly at night roadside snapshots of what looked to be unnatural creatures that were so achingly twisted that one could not even classify them to be humanoid. I chalked it up to be jokes born screaming into this world through the modern horrors of Photoshop, and my fledgling excitement soon sunk into a ball pit of disappointment. That is until I found one reply on the thread that would eventually lead me to some of the most painfully haunting moments of my life. To attract a skinwalker, it began, and proceeded to detail specific steps in how to attract the traditionally native spirit creature. I will not list these steps here, for the main reason that I have ultimately forgotten most of them. But in the moment, 2016 me decided to follow them. When I had fully completed the list over the span of a handful of days, I was humorously reminded of the Sea Bear episode of SpongeBob. Except, these steps were much darker than cubed cheese and hoop skirts. I went about the following days in curious anticipation of any sign of the creature, and just as I was about to throw in the towel, I was met with a miracle of a nightmare. A lucid dream, the first of its kind that I had ever experienced. It was vague, confusing, and nearly void of colour. I was in the tree line just a hop, skip and a jump away from my house, the edge of a small forest that can be seen from the north-facing windows of my home. I stood there in the dark, but it was something but quiet. There was a deafening, head-squeezing hum emitting from the trees. This was not the familiar cacophony of Midwestern cicadas. No, this was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. The closest I can come to capturing the description of the sound would be like standing in a concrete car garage in the middle of the night, without a cricket to keep you company. The kind of silence that feels like water filling your head, that stretches your eardrums to fit all of its angry loneliness. The obvious silence that reverberates through your skull, as if God had forgotten to write the dialogue for the scene. This lasted for what felt to be both a handful of minutes and a handful of days. I had completely forgotten the perception of time in the silent roar of the dreamscape. Then, as if a master hypnotist had snapped their gloved fingers, I woke up. Immediately, tears ran in runnels over my temples, soaking my hairline, and I was coated in shivers. I felt as if I had just witnessed a dream not meant for me. The next few months were absolute obsessive hell. I spent the last edges of summer driving myself insane with a constant search for new information, fresh proof of existence, until I dragged myself into the particularly bitter winter. I had a number of small, less than meaningful encounters, a common occurrence of seeing something running along the road as I drove at night. Sometimes a coyote a little too large, or perhaps a deer with an oddly fast gait. It was in the fresher days of December where things picked up. The events that led me to the end of my hunt can be boiled down to 3 distinct happenings, which will be listed in chronological order. 1. The roof. It was a late night spent scouring the internet for new leads, just like many nights before and many nights to come. As my muscles began to cramp for the night, and my eyes began to dry from staring at a screen for hours on end, I decided to take a water break. I left my room to fetch a glass and greeted my housemate who sat in the open floor plan living room playing some video game I can't recall. As I stood there, drinking my second glass of water in 3 minutes, a peculiar noise heard above me nearly made me choke, what sounded to be something walking directly above me. As someone who has never believed in the legend of Santa Claus, I knew this was not some Christmas miracle. I counted 8 steps in total, and after a few moments of silence I dared to speak to my housemate. I asked her if she had heard that, and she told me to quit trying to scare her. This moment was a case of girl crying wolf, seeing that I had a track record of pranking my housemates with various degrees of spookage. This was not one of those cases, however. I denied her claim and insisted I had not produced the noise, and proceeded to suggest there was someone on our roof. Our attic is rather small and did not stretch to that part of the house, so it was not a critter caught doing the tango with the Halloween decorations. But our house is single-story, so it would only take an average painter's ladder and a strange urge for one to climb onto our roof. I suggested that I would go outside and check it out, but what my housemate said next kept me indoors. She snapped at me, with hints of fear in her voice, and simply told me not to go out. I listened and said nothing else. I went to bed and tried not to listen to the circling footsteps above me. 2. The window. It was days before Christmas, and the house was fully prepared for the holidays. We usually place our tree right in front of the window so our half-gremlin cats have a smaller chance of going fully feral and knocking it over. That year, we placed it in front of one of the 2 north-facing living room windows and set up a cat-proof perimeter wall of presents around it. Because of this setup, it was difficult to reach the window to even close the blinds, and many nights we just left the window's slats open. This night was one of these nights. It was the night before Trash Day, the spectacular weekly holiday dedicated to the magical disappearance of our bagged garbage and broken furniture. It was my turn to wheel the heavy garbage can from the backyard to the front, and the procrastinator in me waited until night to do so. Dressed in a strange ensemble of half-dress clothes and half-pajamas, I donned a coat and began to drag the can to the driveway. Halfway into my chore, a chill trickled down my spine. There was a slow but undeniable knock on the window I was passing, the one with the tree in front of it. 4 or 5 knocks broke the outdoor silence, and I turned to face it. I saw nothing but the warm, twinkling lights and perfectly shaped fake tree branches pressing against the glass. I figured it was my housemate playing a trick on me, or trying to get my attention for something, so I hurried my pace and finished the job before lightly jogging into the house's front door. I called out her name 2 or 3 times before I remembered she had left an hour before to purchase wrapping paper from the local Walmart. I locked the door and kept the lights on until she came back home. 3. The face. The nail in the coffin was hammered into our place in early January. We had just replaced the off-white metal blinds in my room with nice faux wood slats after my lovely little beasties of cats completely destroyed them. The night after we had them installed, I became paranoid that with the lights on, any average neighborhood pervert could peer in, and I had voiced this concern to my housemate. That night, she went outside to inspect as I turned the different lights on. She came back in and assured me I was safe from any peeping creeps. Shortly after, we turned in for the night and wished each other good dreams. At some point during the night, I woke up naturally, although having only slept for a few hours. As I tried to will myself back to sleep staring at the green pinpoint light of my fire alarm, I heard what almost sounded like my housemate calling my name. It wasn't quite her voice, a somewhat disturbed warble. I bottled up, ready to dart into her room to shake her awake. She suffers from sleep paralysis and often cries out my name during her fits to come help her. Then, I heard it again. Except, it wasn't coming from her room, but the other side of my window. 2 thoughts ran through my head. 1. I have never known her to sleepwalk. 2. She already inspected my blinds, so she wouldn't need to again. I walked to my window and carefully lifted one of the slats to peer out. I saw something there, inches away from my window and bent over. I saw what I can only describe to be an airbrushed Voldemort. It looked like its skin was too tight for its body, and its features confused my brain. I couldn't fully comprehend what I was looking at, and I still can't. Its face was a foot above my head, and I had to crouch at an angle to look upward through the slat to see it. It didn't look down at me, I don't think, and I slowly lowered the blind to avoid its detection. Bewildered and frightened, I had a strange feeling of familiarity for the thing, as if I had encountered it before somewhere. I couldn't place it. I quietly padded into my housemate's room and woke her. I told her there was some creep at my window, and she brought up a good point. Whoever it was would have had to have climbed through the 4.5 foot tall, 4 feet wide thorned rose bushes flush against my window. We made the plan to wait until morning and inspect the bushes for shreds of fabric or even blood that could have been left behind by what led my housemate to believe was a peeping Tom. Come morning, there was nothing, not even a chip of disturbed flowerbed mulch, no sign of anyone ever standing there. My housemate became frustrated with me, accusing me of scaring her, and it was at this point I realized I was disturbing my deeply religious and very kind housemate, someone who had never done me any harm. I knew what I had to do. I destroyed my journal that day, the one filled from cover to cover with Skinwalker folklore and legends, facts and leads. I spilled everything to her, and she insisted we smudge the house with sage and sprinkle burnt sage ash in the door frames. We opened the windows and aired the house out. We were near silent during the ritual, and to this day she refused to speak of it when I tried to bring it up. I still feel guilty for putting her in harm's way. What I believed to be a skinwalker never did fully leave. It never bothered my house or disturbed my housemate again, but every once in a while, I'll see something strange in the dark as I drive late at night. An animal that is verging in the uncanny valley, or just a strange feeling prickling my neck when I look out to the woods just beyond my backyard as dawn begins to paint the world aglow. So there you have it, folks. A story I have only told to a small circle of trusted friends. Take it as you will, a cautionary tale or an adventurous challenge. But I can tell you this. My story shared with this creature is not over, and the pages will most likely find their end when I am lowered into the ground. Maybe I will find the courage to hunt for it once more, before it finds me first. Story 3. A long while back, my dad told me a story that stuck with me. I don't know whether it was told as a joke, because he tends to embellish, but he has told me some crazy stories he swears are God's honest truth. It's quite detailed, though, so he must have thought it through if it were a tall tale. Here we go. He has a friend from college who isn't quite as eccentric as does eccentric things, like giving his stake in the lucrative family business to his sister because he wanted to learn what it felt like to be poor, and then demanding it back a week later when he ran out of money after buying a horse. An actual horse. Anyway, he mellowed with time, and around 10 years after graduating, maybe 25 years ago, he contacted my dad for the first time in a few years and invited him to go to the Navajo reservation with him to look for skinwalkers. Obviously, this is a textbook white people mistake, and just so extraordinarily whack, I'm surprised my dad even accepted. He is, however, an author of a few books on various paranormal activities and legends across the US, job security for him as an English professor, and decided to accept, just for the hell of it. The two met up halfway between their homes in Connecticut and California, somewhere in Colorado. My dad's friend, through what I assumed was an earlier internet version of the subreddit Skinwalkers, or perhaps a proto-Craigslist, met up with a native guy willing to take them to find a skinwalker. Massive red flag looking back, seeing as no sane Navajo man would do it. But even so, they headed down to Arizona. My grandmother, my dad's mother-in-law, lived in Scottsdale, so he thought maybe he could pay her a visit while down there. Big mistake. The native guide had a few scruples, one being that no one knew where they were going. Dad's friend happily agrees. He's rich. What's the worst that can happen to him? My dad, of course, started at this point to remember his recently married wife and dreams of starting a family, but at this point is staying at some shithole motel on or near the reservation and has nowhere else to go, since he left his car in a garage in Boulder for a favor of his friend's pimped-out Range Rover. Another scruple was that this guy, who funnily enough had the same name my dad would eventually give his son, needed some payment. And if you looked at his glassy eyes, stained teeth and uneasy gait, as well as the laws of the Navajo reservation, it was easy to guess what. My dad's friend came through on that front, though in the form of 15 bottles of aged single malt whiskey. 15 expensive bottles from his parents' collection that this arsehole drained like Four Loko in 2 days. Did I mention the Navajo dude was a hardened alcoholic? It's also worth mentioning at this point that somewhere along the line, my dad learned this dude was 19. 19! He had the looks of a 50-year-old man and the drinking habits of one too. Turns out scruple number 1 was because this guy needed to hide from his parents, who understandably wanted this kid, who had probably been swigging Jim Beam since he was 7, to come back so they could keep an eye on his raging alcoholism. Didn't work. He got pissed drunk and went off with 2 older white guys in the desert for 10 days. He nearly got killed by a skinwalker. But oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the 3 ditch the Range Rover in a bush somewhere and get to hiking. The kid definitely has some talents because he led the trio across the desert for a week, humping a 90-pound pack for 6 hours a day. This was because the third scruple was that the 2 needed to be prepared for extensive camping. And so they were, with plenty of their own gear, including backpacking tents and 2 firearms apiece. I have no idea how they got all this into the reservation, but they did. As the 3 are hiking on the 8th day in that godforsaken desert, they begin to get tired. Even though he's short, scrawny, and completely drunk, this kid is tiring basically at the same rate as his comrades, both over 6 foot and muscular rugby players, though admittedly getting on in their years off the field. He then, in a scene my dad described with such passion, puts his hand over his eyes, sweeps the barren landscape, and in a voice not unlike a Viking captain proclaiming some unknown land says, "Here is good enough." More than a week they spent in that trackless desert, walking probably in circles with no system of navigation, 2 meals a day, and all terribly sunburnt by then, and all for good enough. By the fire that night, they go over their weapons for the night's hunt. The kid has only one, a 1911 handgun. Might have stolen it from a cop, who knows. A few subpar bullets are all he has to fend off some eldritch monstrosity, but he seems confident enough. My dad's friend has no mean collection. For his sidearm, some old West-looking revolver that he's got all dolled up with engravings, like the Schofield in Red Dead 2, with all the gaudiest customizations. He's also packing an M1 Garand replica, complete with 30 caliber stripper clips. No idea how legally he obtained it, but he did. In that one category, though, my dad has him beat. He owns an authentic Mauser handgun that his grandfather pried from the fingers of a dead German in Belleau Wood, and only sadly stopped working a few years ago after a full century. And an absolute jewel of a weapon, an actual Winchester model 1912 pump-action shotgun with slam-fire capability. It was the same one his grandfather used on that poor German, and I'm proud to say it is in working condition to this day. Suffice to say, the three are sufficiently armed, and finally they turn to the matter at hand. The kid has kept the conversation away from all manners of Skinwalker, and is finally ready to prepare. He gets all the weapons ready and rubs the guns and bullets in ash, just enough that they'll still work. He goes through a few quick tips. It won't be hunting for them. He's brought relics from other people with him, which is a big no-no, I've learned. But what about this trip wasn't? They all need to be awake and lucid, because this thing is smarter than them. And finally he stresses this. If they succeed with their task, they must never speak of it for fear of reviving this thing. As he speaks, he removes some stuff from his pack, including articles of clothing and disgustingly human hair, which he lets them know came from his dearly departed grandma. He also informs them that he may recognize the Skinwalker, in which case he only needs speak its name. Finally, they load their guns and throw the detritus to a spot they can see in the firelight, while keeping their backs to the arroyo wall. The last bombshell he drops is that the thing has probably been following them for the last week, and was waiting for them to reveal their hand. All is quiet for 5 minutes, before the wind changes slightly. First comes an eerie keening noise. It doesn't change position, but fades in and out, coming from a slow direction somewhere in front of them. Slowly, they realize it's whistling. My dad and the guide both know what this means, and their eyes slowly swivel to the horizon, which is to their left, where the last streaks of the sun have faded. The ground in front of them is slowly sloping down a wall a few yards away, while that behind them is a steep wall. The canyon meanders to the right into the darkness, while its mouth is open to their left. They face north, which had some importance I can't remember, but either way, they're not worried about attack from either side or behind. Their eyes are glued north. The guide isn't nervous anymore. He's getting pissed drunk off the final bottle he's been saving for tonight in a remarkable act of self-control. Dad's friend is still kind of confused, but calm, which leaves him sitting between the other two to make sure his gun is loaded and swallow nervously. Finally, the whistling stops, and everything is still. A stench hits my dad like a wall out of the night. Death and decay are what he remembers, plus an uncanny scent he described like flesh burning hotter than the sun. A sudden laughing bursts in from the night, loud and wrong, like a parrot's impression of a human. Slowly, the laughter turns to a voice, repeating bits of conversation from the last week, things they have said during the morning, day and night, plus things my dad has heard the others say in their sleep, all in a voice like someone who knows how to say words, but has never tried, has never heard a human say them. Finally, it says their names, and then the quiet returns. The guide is silent. My dad's friend is sobbing, and the only noise my dad makes is that of the piss running down his leg. The thing jumps down from above, landing in front of the fire, and everyone shoots. The other two miss, and the streaking outlines of their rounds fade into the night. The famous Garand ping sounds before the thing has even moved, as my dad's friend shoots his final round in a panic. The kid is already out, and has clearly never shot his gun before as his grip is off and every shot was a miss. The thing my dad described as too obscene to be classified as an animal, but if it were, to be a long-legged dog that stood on its back legs, like a boxer or a pit bull, but perverted and disgusting. The thing moves closer to the fire and it looks like it's going to walk right through it. Its eyes are bottomless pits, and yet they have colour, like a sickly yellow or a gaudy brown. Its mouth moves in bizarre patterns when it speaks. The noise doesn't come from near it, but as from far away. It chants the things it said earlier, speeding up as it moves closer, interspersed with more laughter. My dad is scared, but he can still speak. Moving jerkily, he throws his Mauser at the kid, telling him to turn off the safety and shoot like hell, then yelling for his buddy to draw his own sidearm. Finally, he stands, and as the other two start blazing away and missing again, he demonstrates the remarkable slam fire capability of the Model 1912. They don't bother to stay. Navigating for the first time, they follow the stars north until they hit a road and stick out their thumbs. At 3:44 a.m. on June 30th, 1991, 6 months before the fall of the Soviet Union, my dad climbed into the back of an old Chevy pickup and gave the guy behind the wheel all the money he had to take them straight to the nearest airport. That night, he was back in, and he has not travelled further west than South Carolina since. A while later, he reconnected with the kid. He'd actually cleaned himself up and wanted to apply to the college my dad worked at. He was, for a wonder, awarded a scholarship. Turns out, he was a hell of a poet, which was somewhat incredulous with the alcoholic redneck who had been nearly killed by an evil demon. He died of liver cancer a year ago today, 27 years and 1 month after the encounter in the desert. My dad's friend got busted for running coke for some friends in Colombia a few years ago. He was a small cog in a large operation. He probably won't be out in this lifetime. My dad still sleeps well at night and got over it after a few years of irregular therapy. His Mauser didn't do much, and he didn't shed too many tears, except for his grandfather's memory. His 1912, meanwhile, is in perfect condition. My dad isn't afraid of skinwalkers in the least anymore, because as he told me proudly, me and Black Jack got a little practice with the help of 5 or 6 slugs, and after that, I'm not worried about another one. He delivered the eulogy at my godfather's funeral. The amount that kid drank didn't do him many wonders, and even 25 years after quitting, the damage had been done. I miss Sam every day, and I'm happy he survived that brawl in the middle of nowhere to shape my father into the man he became. Looking back, that story read like an advertisement for Winchester firearms, but I'm happy I told it, and hopefully it will give you all good advice for your next skinwalker encounter. I cannot stress this enough. Use ash on your weapon. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed listening to my narration. This video was made possible by all those who kindly allowed me to narrate their stories. I always include a link in the video description, so if you want to find out more, please check out the original Reddit posts. It was also made possible by you, my viewers. Without you, I wouldn't feel compelled to find these stories, narrate them, and share them with you on YouTube. I love telling stories, and I truly believe there is great importance for storytelling in our world. It invokes the imagination and opens us up to feel a greater sense of empathy through shared human experiences. That is the reason I do what I do, and one day I hope to do it a lot more than I am currently able to. I have been working on my latest project, which is the podcast Deliver Us. It is available on iTunes and other podcast applications. I write and narrate people's paranormal experiences, so if you enjoyed this video, you will really enjoy the podcast. Currently, I'm releasing episodes bi-weekly. I hope one day I am able to release weekly episodes. Please follow the links in the video description to check it out. Finally, if you do enjoy listening to me narrate, please support me by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. If you feel in any way compelled to support me further, you can do so on my Patreon page for my podcast, or leaving me a one-time tip via my PayPal link. Thank you again for watching.